Welcome to In the Demo, a show about the stories that get told about groups, how those stories got made, what we think those stories get wrong, and why it matters. You hosts? Farrah Bostic is the founder and head of research and strategy of The Difference Engine, a strategic insights consultancy focused on helping business leaders make decisions. Adam Pierno, author and brand consultant and managing director of brand strategy at Arizona State University. You are now in the demo.
Hi, it's Farrah. We're continuing to take a little break from our series on stories about millennial sex, relationships, and intimacy. It's turning out to be a wide-ranging exploration, and so it needs more than a couple of episodes to do more than just sort of scratch at it. We'll come back to it, but first we have a couple of other things we want to share with you. You already know that we're pretty skeptical about generations. We're pretty convinced they're totally made up. Sometimes you've got a measurable boost in birth rates that have a clear beginning and a clear end, a baby boom, if you will. But when we're not talking about baby boomers, things are a lot fuzzier. And by fuzzy, I mean arbitrary and a little bit stupid. I mean, have you ever looked at charts showing how many babies are born each year? It's impossible to discern a pattern, except that the number of babies are growing while the birth rate is declining. So out of those two different data visualizations, a million stories can be born about millennials and their approach to marriage, parenting, motherhood, and more. It's definitely a clearer story, with society having a need and a want, heroes and villains, obstacles to overcome, but it's not really inherently its own story. We have to kind of put that story together. I'm currently reading a book called Doppelganger by Naomi Klein. The conceit of the book is that people have for years now confused her with another Naomi. But in addition to that confusion, just which Naomi are we talking about, there's also this layer of the uncanny that even other Naomi is not really herself, but has become a public self, a performed self. I highly recommend it. But I also had to pause when she began to talk a bit about the legacy of bell hooks while I was reading this book. She wrote about bell hooks that while Hooks believed in the power of naming systems, quote, she was far more ambivalent about the impulse to attach identity signifiers to our beings, to brand ourselves as a this or a that. In her landmark 1984 book, Feminist Theory from Margin to Center, Hooks cautioned readers to, quote, avoid using the phrase, I am a feminist, and opt instead for, I advocate feminism. Explaining that unlike the I am label, which triggers the listener's prior beliefs about what and who is a feminist, the latter is far more likely to begin a conversation about what concrete changes feminism is trying to achieve, and, quote, does not engage us in the either-or dualistic thinking that is the central ideological component of all systems of domination in Western society, end quote. What stood out to me here is something you'll hear in just about every interview we've conducted so far. We've asked people if they identify as millennials, and they say they do. Not only that, they're apt to say, I am such a millennial. Looking at what Hooks had to say about the label feminist, I have to wonder if the millennial label also avoids a conversation about what people in this life stage are in fact going through and what changes they are in fact trying to achieve, and just triggers our beliefs about who and what a millennial is. So if we're right and generations are just a construct, they still have to come from somewhere. Constructs have to be constructed, after all. Some of the raw materials for narratives about generations come from internet trends, memes, a clip that goes viral, like this one.
When I was trying to buy my first home, I wasn't buying smashed avocados for 19 bucks and 4 coffees at $4 each.
So you reckon that's real, that people actually, young people, actually end up just spending their money and then whinge about the fact they can't get into the property market?
Oh, there's no question it's real.
This clip aired on the Australian version of 60 Minutes in May 2017, which is also when the search term avocado toast began to trend in search. This one guy, Tim Gurner, was recently in the news for calling employees arrogant and calling for a 40 to 50% increase in unemployment, so we'll all be more grateful to our bosses and realize that we need them more than they need us. So sure, he's great at creating viral moments, but this is a group activity. Tim needs people writing on deadline and doing it for the clicks to get his ideas to go viral. He's recently learned that this kind of group activity can be painful and not merely profile raising. But if there's anyone who has had a front row seat to the construction of various meme-ified elements of the millennial narrative and the Gen Z narrative too, it has to be journalist Taylor Lorenz. She began her career in tabloids and blogs, rapid filing stories about internet culture, and is now a tech and culture reporter at the Washington Post. She has her first book out on October 3rd. It's called Extremely Online: The Untold Story of Fame, Influence, and Power on the Internet. It's published by Simon & Schuster, and you can pre-order it now, or if you're not getting around to watching this, you can go ahead and order it online wherever books are sold. What follows in this episode is our conversation with Taylor. We recorded it a few weeks ago. It's about her career, about her book, and about her experience of the evolving narrative identity of millennials as seen through this convergence of tech and culture. And I really hope that you enjoy it.
All right. I'm Adam Pierno, Generation X.
I'm Farrah Bostic, the Love Boat generation. I wanted to be Julie. I wanted to be the person that welcomed you onto the boat. I had a clipboard and everything. It was my life's goal.
Of course.
And I'm Taylor Lorenz, and I'm a millennial.
We have a very, yes, that's exactly it. We do have a very special guest today. We have Taylor Lorenz. She has a new book. I think Farrah and I have safe to say, have been spending a lot of time of our lives reading your writing, but now we have a new book to dig into, Extremely Online: The Untold Story of Fame, Influence, and Power on the Internet. But I've been reading you in, oh man, The Atlantic, everywhere, going back. Where are you writing now?
Now I work for the Washington Post, and I'm a tech columnist covering online culture.
Got it. And you are a millennial.
I am. I'm a real millennial. I graduated right into the recession, like a lot of millennials.
So do you own the millennial identity with pride?
Yeah, I mean, it's what I am, and I feel like I'm like also, for a while I was a little bit like I always thought people a little bit older than me were like cooler, and so some of my friends identify as Gen X, and I was like, oh, that's cool, but I'm down with the millennial label, so
Nice.
That's who I am.
As a millennial, go ahead, Farrah.
No, go ahead. I was just going to ask. We're starting the same segue.
Oh yeah, do it.
I'm curious. As we ask this of everybody that we talk to who's a millennial, as a millennial, and I guess also as someone who covers what you cover for, major outlets, how do you feel about, like, we've been talking about this kind of idea of a millennial narrative, and it has undergone some transformation over time. How do you feel about the way it's been constructed, how it's evolved, how it continues to portray your generation?
Yeah, well, I really made a name for myself. Like, I mean, initially I was a blogger and wrote for a lot of digital media sites, but it was really Mike.com that like I started breaking the most news for, which was like the quintessential millennial site. I think the New York Times story on them was something like, what if millennials ran a media company or something? And it was all supposed to be for millennials, by millennials. That was back when like everyone thought like millennials are the ones that are on their phones too much, and they're like the young problematic ones. And I actually wrote about this in 2017 for Mike.com and for BuzzFeed. I wrote about this flip in 2017 when people really started to sort of like prioritize Gen Z in terms of marketing, and also a lot of Gen Z marketing firms cropped up, and people really started to like, I guess, stop caring as much about millennials. So
that's interesting. We've talked about the shift of the narrative, but I don't think we've talked about, because we were prioritizing Gen Z as the next marketing target. We've talked about the recessionary period and coming out of that, how millennials didn't have as much money, but we didn't say like, oh, and there's a replacement behind them that maybe does have some more discretionary funding.
Yeah, I just noticed that, I mean, in 2017 when I did this story too, because there were all these Gen Zers selling themselves as consultants and saying like, I'm a teenager, and like, we're Gen Z, we're not millennials. Like, we know what's up with whatever, and trying to get those marketing dollars. but soon those kids are going to get replaced too. So it all moves on. But yeah, I mean, millennials, I think we got the short end of the stick. I saw something on Washington Post recently that was saying that I can't remember the name they gave us, something depressing, but like the unluckiest generation or something. And it was just saying how like, basically there's been like 2 recessions or 2 major events of like the 2008 recession and then the like COVID pandemic and stuff and the effects that had on like the labor market and just how like we're never going to be able to buy a house or save. And I was like, yeah, that's probably true.
Have you seen, you started blogging and then you were at Mike, which was, you're right, it was like built for millennials. It was perfect for that time and place. Have you seen your beat change, over the course? You're now with the Washington Post. It's a lot different scale, a lot different priorities, but just covering technology and online culture, besides the pace of that, have you seen the kind of your beat change in any other ways?
Oh, yeah, it's changed so much. A lot of that's what my book's about, actually, just sort of like the evolution of the social internet. When I started in 2009 blogging and in the early 2010s, content creator culture was really associated with millennials and a little bit Gen X too. Like, I mean, some of the people in the first content house ever, which is called The Station in 2009, that was like Phil DeFranco, all these other people that were like Shay Carl, all these people that were very much actually, I think, Gen X technically. And then, yeah, I think like the rise of YouTube was very like intertwined with the millennial narrative. I don't think it's until TikTok took off that you started to see this like shift in like sort of platforms and sort of like their association with a younger generation. Vine was very associated with millennials. Instagram, we have the whole like Instagram millennial pink aesthetic. So, yeah, it's shifted a lot, but millennials were the ones that really were that first sort of like social generation. I think there were these Gen Xers in it initially, especially in the 2000s, but I think millennials were the first to grow up with mass social media.
Yeah, and they were, you're right, millennials were identified by those platforms, Instagram especially, yeah, and Vine.
Yeah.
Poor Vine.
Well, Gen X would also be too old to have a .edu address to be on Facebook in the first round of Facebook as well. I mean, when I was working in a research company and we were like looking at Facebook, we couldn't look at Facebook. We had to kind of ask people about Facebook because we didn't have.
Tell us what's happening there.
That's crazy.
In the early days.
Hello, fellow kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I went to a big state school for most of college, and I can't imagine not using Facebook, especially like I was in a sorority, and I just like Facebook was such a utility, especially in the 2000s. Like that was just how you connected with people at school and found people in your classes, because you used to be able to see everyone in your classes. Which I guess they took away probably a long time ago, but that was, Facebook was everything in the 2000s. And I talk about that in my book too. I talk about the rise of Facebook, and actually I talk more about how Facebook sort of taught us all to post for the public.
Right.
That's what I was just going to ask. Was Facebook kind of the gateway drug of training millennials, or anybody actually who started on Facebook, how to post, how to present themselves online?
Yeah, and I think it gets really written out of a lot of history. A lot of people think that the content creator world started with YouTubers, and that's not true at all. It started, of course, with bloggers, and specifically mommy bloggers and fashion bloggers and lifestyle bloggers, and these people sort of cultivating cults of personality and then monetizing it. But Facebook was the real gateway drug. Like you said, it kind of like taught everyone to post for an audience and taught us all to kind of perform for this digital audience and taught us to have this digital presence in the world almost. And so even though a lot of people don't associate it with influencer culture, I think without Facebook and the news feed, really, which is what did that, and we wouldn't have what we have today.
Yeah, it was even a giant leap from the kind of MySpace experience previous to that. We were just talking the other day about, this is an aside, but I was listening to a playlist somebody made, and it had a Death Cab cover of Against All Odds. Take a look at me now, that song. And I like posted about it on Instagram, and a friend of mine who is a millennial was like, this was my best friend's MySpace song. Like it was the song that put on his MySpace page. And I was like, oh, I really missed this when it came out if it was on his MySpace page. But yeah, that sort of transformation into out of these like deliberately ugly pages onto a fairly uniform experience, but it's all in the feed and you can see what everybody's doing. And that like it did feel like a more posting for the public experience as opposed to like posting for your friends.
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, I talk about this, but MySpace had such a different value proposition, and actually the way their marketing materials looked, they talked about themselves exactly how TikTok talks about themselves, which is this like entertainment platform, and it's about sort of like scale and discovery and all this stuff, and which at the time I think it was really too early. Like I don't think most people wanted to have that much discovery on the internet and be exposed to people that they didn't know as often, like most people. So, Facebook won out. But I do think like it's funny to kind of see the pendulum shift back. And actually a lot of that stuff that MySpace was really thinking about, we now, have.
Mm-hmm. They were ahead of their time.
Yeah.
Now we have the technology to actually do it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I'm curious about with the way your beat has changed is I have kind of two sides of this that I was thinking about over the last few days. And one was, I guess part of it was I was like, when was the last time, like when was it not the last time, when was the first time I came across you? And I think it was probably, I don't know, probably around like, I honestly don't know. It has to have been after 2015 because of which apartment I was living in. But that was
okay.
So that was so late to your game, but I think kind of an interesting period of time for you. You were like on a lot of podcasts. You were being interviewed by like the Recode people and that kind of stuff. And I was seeing you pop up in the tech and business larger press. Like they were interested in what you were talking about, what you were seeing. I was seeing you in like trends decks in ad agency work. Like you don't know this, but you were basically writing.
You're like a celebrity. You're like a
strategist.
PowerPoint celebrity. You don't know that yet.
Oh my God. That's so cool.
What I was thinking about
cool.
was, I mean, years and years and years ago, in the early 2000s, my first job in an ad agency, we would have youth trends consultants come and like pitch the latest trends that they were seeing to us. And we would kind of look at it and go, that's like a couple dozen kids you saw around FIT and in Union Square. And it's not really relevant to the brand we're working on, but thanks for coming. And that would just sort of be the end of that. Like, you might get some brand to pick up that trend and actually make it a trend. But what I started to notice was, if you wanted to know what are the kids into and what are the memes you should leverage as a brand and who are the creators we should partner with, like the easiest thing was just to like stick a Google alert on Taylor Lorenz and then the deck built itself. And so take that as a compliment if you like. I don't know if it is or not. But I think there was this kind of feeling, and I think there still is, that you have you and other people on your beat have the, but probably you more than other people, for good or ill, are kind of this almost like, for the people who are not of the internet as much, right? Even if they're building things and funding things and covering it, they're not living their lives online in the same way. That you're kind of in this hit maker or curator role for them. But so like you kind of look at the timeline of your pieces and it's a lot of like, here's fun, interesting stuff you should know about what's happening on the internet. And I feel like it started to kind of take a little bit of a turn to like, here are the people who are exploiting and ruining the internet. and not all the time.
Well, it's not, I can talk about that, by the way, like how it's changed and why it's changed. Well, for the first part of my career, it was really just trying to convince people that this was a beat, which was a huge uphill battle. Like, I mean, even around Vine, like when I was reporting on that stuff in like 2014, 2015, like you couldn't get editors to care. They would let you do those stories basically like in your fun spare time. But I was running social for my day job because no one would even make this a beat. They were like, we don't like someone to cover the internet. Like that's just a niche thing. And they didn't take it seriously either. And they certainly didn't consider it tech reporting. And a lot of people were so livid that I was calling myself a tech reporter because I wasn't reporting on like, the Facebook board switch up or something, or like reviewing iPhones. Like people were really, really hostile to the notion of covering tech culture, I guess. It was weird. And there just wasn't, outside of Katie Notopoulos at BuzzFeed, there was like no one really like, as it was very hard to get like mainstream places to take it seriously. So I felt like I had to write up every silly trend and whatever. And then now that there's this whole like group of people, though not nearly enough, but there's a lot more people that are sort of covering the daily trends, I try to kind of talk more about the bigger stories and like the bigger implications. Now I'm at the Washington Post, so they care a lot about political implications and stuff like that. But it's also just the industry has changed so much. And, back like when I was covering like O2L, like collab, YouTube House or something like that, like you sort of don't really think about how all of these things eventually ended up being weaponized by, I famously wrote this story about like revealing the woman behind libs of TikTok, or like, how the right wing sort of influencer machine, how they've taken over. And so I think it ended up having sort of big political implications, which I write about now. But I still like to do the fun stories when I can, but I also don't feel the need to do every story because I know that there's so many other great people. I mean, I love like Callan Rosenblatt at NBC. She writes about like a lot of, she's always like doing the trend explainers. Yeah. And then Rebecca Jennings at Vox does such great internet analysis. EJ Dixon too at Rolling Stone is really good, and Miles Klee. So there's just a lot more people that I'm like, okay, if I don't do that story, it's all good.
You could read your stories and see that part of the narrative of, millennials and the internet. That's cute. Like talking about Vine and then talking about Hype House and talking about, these as the trends built in, as the culture connected to business and politics and people started to make those connections. You can actually see in your writing, and obviously moving from pub to pub, you can kind of see the maturation of people saying like, oh, I get it. I see now how this all connects to it in a way that probably we were, as a Gen X, I was like, I don't know, Vine is fun. I don't really want to think about it too much more than that. I like these 6-second videos. Please don't make me think about it.
Very Gen X.
Well, Vine was one of the last social. Vine was one of the last social platforms that was never weaponized by political factions.
It was just fun.
It was just fun.
Which is why it went away?
No, it went away because, well, actually, my book has tons of information and actually a lot of tea about the end of Vine. And just actually, they had an incredibly hostile relationship with their creator community. The founders did, and they drove their biggest creators off the app, and it ended up really kind of damaging the app to a point of no return because they lost most of their engagement. And then it was really mismanaged. It was under Twitter, which is notoriously mismanaged now, even more so. But even back then, it was just really hard. They didn't monetize quick enough. They made so many errors. I have a whole chapter, actually I have almost 2 chapters about Vine and the rise of Vine and what happened, and also just like the aftermath, which led to this explosion in social video.
Yeah. And I saw you actually just recently in the HQ, and I was like, oh yeah, she's probably got a lot of background from Vine on these guys.
Yeah, it was crazy. That was like right when I switched from, I was running social for companies and writing on the side always. And then finally in 2017, like that, again, that was the year so much changed. And I decided to write full time. And like my first month writing, I did that HQ story and it just like went crazy. It's very funny.
That was like right place, right time, I think, part of it.
Oh yeah, totally. Also, it was just like Russ is a really wild character. And I knew him not just from Vine. I was one of the sort of top influencers on Hype, which was the live streaming app that was the precursor to HQ that I was addicted to. And I would live stream for hours on Hype, and I was like on the popular page all the time. And so when I did that story, I just remember being like, Russ, it's like, it's me, it's Taylor Lorenz. Like, I'm not writing a hit piece on Scott Rogowski at all. Like, I don't care. I love this product. And yeah, he's, it's all good.
So I think this also is a thing that Adam and I've been really curious about, because the framing of pieces about different generations seems to almost be like a house point of view about it, and we were wondering like how much of this is the reporter's beat, how much of this is whoever writes the headlines, how much of this is like coming from an assignment editor who's like, we know we get a lot of clicks when millennials are in the head or the subhead, like those kinds of things. And I would also say it's interesting what you said about the Washington Post being more kind of politically oriented, because the thing I did notice, even just like the skim through your pieces for the Times, the skim through your pieces for the Post, and way more of your headlines in the Times name check Gen Z, name check millennials, whereas more of your posts on, I hope I'm not overstating this, but like on the Washington Post are like just name checking the businesses or the CEOs. Like it's TikTok, it's Elon, it's whatever that gets talked about there. What's the role of the kind of editors and the machine behind trying to get traffic for how these sorts of stories about meme culture, about youth culture get assigned, get covered, get edited? Maybe talk like a little glimpse behind the scenes for us about that.
Yeah, well, they don't care about traffic. They care about subscriptions. So it's all about converting to subscribers, which is a huge change because it used to be all about traffic. And I came up in that digital media ecosystem where like you had traffic goals, and if you didn't meet your traffic goals, like you were screwed. And like I just remember being like, I have to hit 5 million this month. I have to hit 5 million, and I'm going to write up some stupid trend because I need to hit my numbers, and feeling that pressure. And then now I would say in the past, like 4 or 5 years, especially at places like the Times and the Post, they're so much more focused on like converting their subscriber base, especially the Post. The Post is actually way more focused. I mean, just working there, I think a lot more about subscribers than I did at the Times. I still thought of traffic, but so there's those sort of structures at play when you're writing headlines. You're thinking like, okay, what is this? But also, I like to write silly headlines, and you don't get to choose the headlines for your own stories. So editors write the headlines, and if I could put headlines on my own stories, I think they would be, my first job was at the Daily Mail actually, and I came from tabloid. I love tabloid news, and so my inclination with headlines is to always kind of like sell the drama of the story or like get people clicking. And at the Post they like to tone it down big time, so it's definitely more I think it's usually just a more straightforward headline instead of like Elon demolishes, whatever. Like there's not those adjectives in there, which I totally get. That's not the kind of paper it is. But but if I was writing my headlines, I think I would probably add some more drama. But yeah, it's just interesting, like that also just the nature of media. Like, I mean, I used to be in these jobs where, again, back in digital media days, you had to post, like you had to post all day long. And it was this blog culture, which I came from, where you're like posting all day and you're just trying to get page views and traffic. And now no one cares about page views. We also do like slideshows were a big thing for a while. And it's just not that incentive structure isn't there anymore, because I think a lot of people understand that traffic is silly. And if you want to get traffic, honestly, you just write up SEO headlines, and Facebook isn't delivering the traffic that it used to. That was another thing, is I would write articles specifically for Facebook traffic.
Yeah.
Does that drive for subscriber? That kind of changes the nature of reporting overall, because you're not trying to get a single story that is salacious or click-worthy and then share-worthy. You're trying to build trust so that somebody says, okay, I'll pay the $8.95 for next month when that bill comes, should they remember. So do you get direction from the editorial team to take a tone, or to have that high-level perspective versus the, Elon demolishes X, Y, or Z, or Gen Z and boomers are at each other's throats kind of New York Post headlines?
Yeah, I think it's like, I think they just want good quality journalism, and they just, that's what they, prioritize is the reporting. And I like filing story. I literally just posted in Slack. I'm like, if anyone has a daily story, like I am a reporter, like a lot of reporters, that like needs a fix. Like if my byline isn't on the internet, I feel like I don't exist. And it's been a real hard, I'm a features writer now too. So like, I don't actually, like my job is to write features, which actually take a couple weeks. I just got back from a 2-week reporting trip. I'm writing this 3,000 word thing. So like that is my job, but I again, I think just having spent like, you know, almost a decade in that like traffic world, like I'm just like, oh my God, I haven't posted. Oh my God, I haven't posted. And so I think I post so much on the internet because it's like that mentality of like, you have to have the latest thing out or you're going to be forgotten. You know, people are not going to go to you anymore or something if you only write 3 times, which is not true. I mean, I know that's not true even when I look at other writers, but it's too baked into my head now, I think.
Yeah, become a habit.
Yeah. But I have a really great editor. I will just say, like, my editor at the Post is like one of the best editors I've ever had in my entire life. And I don't want to age him. I think he's 70 or 68 or something. But, you know, there's this notion that like, oh, boomers, or people always think like, oh, who's your editor? You know, do you have some like hip, like, you know, young editor or something? And I have to tell you, like, Pui Wang Tam, who was my editor at the Times too, like one of the best editors I've ever had in my life. Certainly not, you know, she's definitely a generation older than me. I don't think she's as old as Mark, my editor now, but I've been really, really, really lucky because I think the most important thing is to have really good journalism editors. Like my editor, Mark, now is just, I can't even explain to you this man. He is like the best editor and of storytelling. And, you know, I don't think you actually have to have, and he gets it. Like he gets it so much more than even people younger, like, you know, people that I've worked with that are younger than me. Like, so I don't think it's an age thing. I think there are people, there are boomers out there that are like so with it.
Yeah.
And,
well, and that's funny too, because we were, you know, in preparing for this conversation, I was reminded of your OK Boomer piece.
Oh yeah.
From what was that, 2019 or something? And
2019.
And this kind of idea about kind of intergenerational war and it's very funny because like that idea definitely got popularized. I think there's a little bit of a I feel like it comes more from Gen X meme makers, you know, and people on Instagram who are like exhausted by the idea.
No, well, okay,
but also want to fight.
Yeah,
you know.
Oh yeah. Oh, the whole like faith generational war. Yeah, but OK Boomer that came from TikTok. That was a TikTok comment spam thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a way to like dismiss people as like at the time as like out of touch. I think the whole like Gen Z millennial thing is like mostly just like elder millennials and Gen Xers that like want to like make some kind of drama. I tried to do a story. Oh my God. I didn't end up having time. I tried to do a story and I called literally dozens of hair experts. And I'm still really mad I didn't do this story, but there was some sort of breaking news that I had to prioritize and then it seemed too late about this like this notion that the middle part is like some sort of distinction.
Yeah, the side part. The side part was like
the side part.
Yeah.
I interviewed all these hair experts and hair trend people. They were like, no, the middle part peaked in 2015. Actually. And then it kind of, that was this like turning point. It was nothing. And actually we're seeing not that, you know, that's not like the hairstyle at all, other than men started to wear like a different sort of, I guess, middle part of hairstyle. But anyway, that narrative was again, such a lie, totally made up. And so I've had a middle part for like a really long time. So I was very personally invested in this story. And yeah, I was like, I'm going to debunk this. And my editor at the time was like, okay, there is like actual news happening right now, Taylor, that you need to focus on.
You're like, this is key information. I need to have this.
I was like, enough with this narrative.
It was such a thing that even a few weeks ago I went to get my hair cut and she was like, I'm gonna do a center part to cut it, even though I have no part. It just does random crap because I have a colic. And I was like, I kind of made a joke. I was like, oh, is this the millennial thing? And she was like, no. It's just that like if I cut it with a center part, then it won't be too long if it flops over to the other side. And I was like, oh, okay, fine. I understand what you're doing now. But she kind of like sighed first before explaining to me that it was not a millennial thing. So I would have read the piece is I guess what I'm saying, Taylor, because that definitely felt like
and
this thing was percolating.
Yeah, hairstyles change over time, but this one did not. Like, so anyway.
Yeah.
Do you ever you do kind of break news on these trends? I mean, you're not actually breaking the news on them, but I learn about them through you. And because your accounts and you're so visible on the post, for example, it's like, oh, okay, if Taylor's saying that's something to look at. But with the hair example and a bunch of others, like the water skiing thing that was on TikTok a couple of weeks ago, like how often do you hear about these and not even have to debunk them, where you just intuitively say like, no, that's not a real one. We don't have to chase that one down.
Oh, so many times. I mean, now again, too, it's like it's such a different media landscape, because I used to feel like, oh my God, if I don't write this, no one will write it. No one's talking about it. It's going to be wrong. Like that comic, like someone is wrong on the internet, like, and now also it's not just that there's so many more phenomenal trend reporters, like, some of the people that I just mentioned and so many more that are like really accurately covering these trends. But also there's this whole like commentary industry on TikTok now that like debunks things in real time and like gives cultural commentary. And I think just like contextualizes trends in a really smart way. So I think that's really helpful, actually, is like you see, not only do you see the trend, but you see the immediate pushback and discourse about it and all that. So yeah.
And then do you apply that to stories about millennials or larger groups? Farrah and I are really interested in stories about groups. That's how this podcast started, but we're focused on millennials at the time right now. Do you see that same, is there a machine around that too? That is, we see like the Post will never miss an opportunity to say millennials are killing this, or what was the one the other day, Farrah? Millennials are having drive-through weddings or whatever it was, which no data about a single age.
No, there's never data. Never data. It's literally like, oh, I found 3 people.
Yeah.
I saw a post about this once.
Yeah.
I told you, Adam, 3 people is a trend. And that's how you know. 3 people
it's
in
like,
Australia.
No, but it's like, they don't even have 3 people. Sometimes for some of these trend stories, it's literally like an editor saw something once and decided this, and they know it's going to be, a juicy headline.
Well, and that was one where I was curious, because there, I think there are obviously like Nick Gillespie and Reason was like, okay, Boomer went mainstream because of Taylor Lorenz. And so I jokingly wanted to ask you, like, so how's the war going and who's winning? But on the other hand, like, there are other stories like the Chugi thing, which is interesting because it is this thing that's like percolating a little bit on TikTok and elsewhere. But when you go look at like the Google Trends thing, like all of a sudden the search terms go up like the day after your piece goes up. And it's
because so can I explain something too?
Yes.
Because I write a lot of stories about language and a lot of stories about language. I mean, I write about, obviously, okay, Boomer. I wrote about the rise of the term NIMSAL, niche internet micro-celebrity. I've made so many terms about, I actually wrote a whole story about algo speak, which is the sort of type of language people use on TikTok, like saying like unalive instead of dead and things like that. And I just am so interested in the way that language shapes the internet. There's actually a great book on all of this called Because Internet by Gretchen McCullough, who's a linguist. But the reason that I like to write the stories is not necessarily like, especially with the Chugi story, it wasn't like, the story even says, it's like, this is not a widespread thing. It's actually like this niche thing that's gone actually quite viral in a small community. But I think it speaks to this larger trend. And like, why does this word seem to be resonating with everyone that sees it? And it's because it sort of like put a name to this like aesthetic and sensibility that people didn't previously have a name for. And so I think like when you're bringing that to a wider audience, it's important to say like, by the way, like this is this like thing, but it actually might be, you might find it useful too. You might find this language useful too. And obviously people did, and it really did hit a nerve and it went super viral. But yeah, the girl who made it, I also love her because she went to CU Boulder, which is where I went to school too. She said she's a zillennial. Like she's not a millennial or Gen Z. I don't know what she called herself, a zillennial. It's like in between the two or something. So
it's
she was
right.
like,
I was supposedly
people keep calling me Gen Z.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's all these like weird middle ground people, but she's a copywriter and she's great. And she ended up deleting that video, but because she was getting so much hate, like for a while, there was too much discourse about Chugi. I think she regretted unleashing it. But yeah, anyway, a lot of people are like, oh, I don't think there's like a bar to write about trends. I think you can write about small, interesting things where you're taking this little nugget and being like, look at this interesting thing. Don't you think that's like fascinating or relevant? Or maybe you might want to use this word too, because it actually speaks to this thing. But as long as you're not overselling it as like, which a lot of articles that followed did, they made it sound like it was this thing. And it's like, guys, like you made it a thing. Like now it's a thing because the New York Times wrote about it, but like it really wasn't before. So I don't know.
The insight I just heard is with the Chugi example. Hey, this group of people is talking about this, and I think it's a word that describes a blank space in your head, maybe. And stories that the Post writes about millennials are like, let's put these people in a container and critique them versus, hey, we should look at this story about drive-through weddings as an overall change in the way people look at weddings, or look at how the economy is impacting that, or relationships. Like there's a million ways you could expand that out and make it a story that relates. But instead they say like bad people doing thing that harms boomer economy or whatever it is.
Also, like I hate that.
You mean the New York Post, right?
I do mean. I'm sorry. I do mean specifically the New York Post and not the Washington Post. I think Taylor knew that too. But thank you, listeners. Yeah.
I know people say the Post, and I still think of the New York Post because I'm from New York. And in my head, I'm like the Post, the New York Post. I'm like I work for the Washington Post. The New York Post, the Daily Mail. I mean, look, like they love these kind of. They love stuff like that. It's just bait. But I think it's a loss because there are real interesting things to talk about with this stuff. I think a lot of those articles are just designed to trigger people into clicking and sharing.
They work. We share them in our Slack and Google Docs. So New York Post has us, definitely.
Well, they have us going for 7 cents. This is.
They got you in a chokehold.
Yeah, definitely. This is our beat, I guess, at the moment.
Well, and also because, I think the people who are reacting to it are people who are like not in that culture, right? They're sitting outside of the culture, and what they're attracted to is not just like this thing is interesting. It's like I should have a take on this thing. It's either further proof that there's something wrong with young people, or it's further proof that you can't talk to people anymore, or whatever it is. It sort of fuels that sense of separation anyway. My uncle, who absolutely does not listen to this podcast, is totally that guy, right? Who like at some point early mid-pandemic, called me up and was like, the city is on fire, right? And it's just a hellhole now. And I was like, no, it's fine. And people are eating outside. It's really pleasant, actually. Thank you for asking. When I moved to Brooklyn, he thought that this was just like the Bronx is burning kind of an imagination.
And times.
My big pet peeve with all that stuff is they also, especially the Today Show, the biggest culprit of this more than anyone else, and I wrote about this recently, they push completely fake, made-up TikTok trends constantly. And they did one recently claiming multiple people had died, literally died, which they'd previously have claimed people have died from other trends too, that do not exist. And when I chased this one, they were saying the boat jumping challenge and people are dying. And I traced it down to a random man, not even like a law enforcement officer, a random man in Alabama had made one comment on local news. And they ran an entire Today Show segment saying this stuff and scaring parents and being like, this is what young people are doing today. And it's like, no, they're not. And I mean, I've written, every single time one of these trends comes up, I feel like I have to debunk it. But it's like, it's just bait for these news organizations that just want to like terrify people or anger people into engaging with their content. It's so corrosive.
Yeah. And there's no repercussions. You debunk it. It aired, it's over, they don't have to address it. It's not like it's a paper of record where there's some way for them to even issue a correction, even if they were inclined to do it. So
they don't care because they keep doing it.
Right.
I truly think, I was like fighting with the NBC PR woman recently. It's just like, if you cared about this, this is like the 10th time you've done this, it's like, if you cared about actually reporting on TikTok trends, you would do that. You wouldn't just keep spinning up these nonsense stories just to get engagement. The craziest one was Momo. I don't know if you remember that from a few years ago.
I remember the Momo challenge very well.
Which was not a thing. It was like just a creepy picture. And they were like, children are killing themselves when they are sent this picture. And it's like, no, they are not.
That's not how things work. Yeah.
Also, this picture is not sentient. Like the way they were writing about it, it's a fear of new technology, and it's a fear of like, what are children doing on their phones? But instead of really actually worrying about things like data privacy and exploitation, like, by these companies, they just get scared about stupid things.
Yeah. They can find the symptom, but they can't find the actual way to express the underlying concern.
Well, it's easier to do the moral panic thing about something's wrong with our kids than it is to say something's wrong with these tech CEOs or these regulators or these, media companies who are causing, creator and influencer burnout, or what, like you've written so many, like I saw the boat jumping piece, but I was also thinking about the piece that you did a while ago about creator burnout and like the way that kind of the revenue models work, the algorithms work, the incentives. I mean, when you were talking before about Vine having this antagonistic relationship with creators, I feel like we just keep repeating that cycle. And it even exists in legacy media. I think about the quote from, I think it was Jill Abramson, about the Times is always the prettiest girl in the room. And so your brand as a reporter or a columnist or whatever should never be bigger than the Times. And it's like,
I totally disagree with that.
You have to have your own brand. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
this is why I don't work at the New York Times anymore. That's delusional. Yeah. I mean, it's good for their business. If I was the CEO of the New York Times, I would have the same posture. But I think, look, the Times is a great place because it's impossible to get like fired from there. Like they have a really strong union, which is good, by the way. Like I love the security of that place. You can literally work there for like 50 years and people it's an amazing place. And people have and people do. And like, I love that there's a place in journalism that offers that level of stability. I think it's great. And so many journalists are happy to just go there and disappear into the Times and just write, the stories that they're assigned. For me, I am way more entrepreneurial, and I like to do outside projects, and I'm always doing things, and the Times is like very against all of that. And so it's just very limiting. But I do miss my editor there.
Can I ask a question about that? That seems to be like a millennial trait that would be assigned to you by the people writing the millennial narrative, that you're disloyal or you job hop or you're entrepreneurial is the positive side of it, which I think is a positive. So have you been kind of victimized by the narrative in that way?
Yeah, but I will admit when the editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast hired me for entry-level salary, which was such bullshit. I still feel I deserved more. He was like, I'm giving you this entry-level salary because, you've never been a full-time writer. You've only been writing part-time. And I'm like, okay, but my stories are blowing up, whatever. And I said, okay, pay me this, but I swear to God, the first person that offers me more money, I'm going to take the job. And I know that's only going to be in a few months because I'm very good. And like, you're undervaluing me. And he was like, well, it's all we have in the budget or whatever. Guess what? 6 months later, the Atlantic came, offered me significant raise, and I left and I quit, and I didn't even give them a chance to counter. And they were like, what? Like, and I was like, John, you like,
lowballed me.
I was like, I told you I was going to leave. And he was like, you know what? You're right. So no, I like very openly will job hop all the time. If someone wants to pay me more money and give me more opportunities, why would I turn that down? I have no loyalty to any company because no company has loyalty to me. It's a company,
right?
Like it's not a charity. And I'm there to do my job, and I love I have loyalty to people, like my editor right now. I love my editor so much, and I, really love working with him. But if my editor left, who knows?
Well, Taylor, really grateful for your time. I think we have run out of clock here with you. Your book, Extremely Online, The Untold Story of Fame, Influence, and Power on the Internet. Simon & Schuster, you're big time.
People don't understand the difference between having a publisher, by the way, and self-publishing. That's one thing I've learned from this book.
What's the biggest difference?
I have never self-published, but a lot of people were very frustrated that the book is not like immediately online. And I had to explain, like, it's actually going, through this whole process. And people were like, well, I uploaded my book to Amazon and it only took 3 days or whatever. And I'm like, that's because you self-published it. So they don't, it's just been so interesting to I've learned a lot about the publishing industry, and I've been trying to sort of like educate a lot of my followers are very young. So I'm trying to explain to them.
Yeah. If you post something for that group and they're like, I want this right now, I will start reading this immediately. Yeah.
They're like, pre-order, what's that?
Yeah.
Like,
I'm not waiting.
Put it on the internet.
Yeah. Why can't I have this?
So, well, thank you so much for having me. This was such a fun chat.
Thank you so much for making time for us.
In the Demo is produced by Farrah Bostic and Adam Pierno with support from The Difference Engine, and edited by Allison Preisinger and AMP Studio. Music by Omega Man under the Creative Commons license. Go to inthedemopodcast.com for behind-the-scenes research and supporting information. Please rate and review the show. Someone told us that helps.